All right, everyone, welcome back to the Ventures Podcast. This is continuing a series that I'm kicking off here in 2023 around product and code. This is going to be teaching Web 2 and Web 2.5 and Web 3 product skills that I talked about last episode. And we're also going to be diving into Ruby on Rails and training people how to build modern day web applications using the Hotwire stack, HTML over the wire. I'll talk as we go about why I'm pretty bullish about that stack versus a more front-end heavy stack like a React or a Vue.js or one of those. But so for the foreseeable future for this podcast, again, if you're just listening to it, I'll do my best to describe what I'm talking about here. But for everybody else, you can watch the screencast of this by visiting wclittle.com, or more accurately, you can just click on the link in the show notes. That'll go take you directly to the video so that you can watch the screencast of it. But what I'm going to basically plan to do is do a little bit of product and a little bit of code every episode here this year. We might have some interlude episodes where I'll interview some guests on some special topics. But for the main part, I think I want to just communicate to people who are either in the cohort or one of the cohorts that we're going to be running this year, or if you're just following on your own. Again, you can join Banyan DAO if you want to participate in the community on that. Again, I'll put that link in the show notes. Or if you're just following along on your own, this is great because I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. Plenty of great Rails tutorials and Ruby tutorials and JavaScript tutorials and all the different things you need to learn. I'm not trying to recreate those. I'm merely attempting to give you an overview here of the types of things we're going to be talking about when we talk about product, i.e. digital products, and the types of things we're talking about when we're talking about code, i.e. we're going to be starting here with web apps, and you're going to be learning about how to get your everything set up to be able to build web applications. So basically, to dive right in, we're going to start with product things. So again, I've written a whole tutorial series about how to create, grow, and fund a tech startup, a whole operational framework around that. And I definitely recommend you read through how to tee up your idea, do a 3-sentence overview statement, do some market analysis and customer segments, and then identify your team and go through surveys and interviews and advisors and start running some experiments. But actually, for this purpose, we're going to dive right into this overview story. And when you're creating a product, I recommend not only if you're going to build a tech startup to go through all the steps I just mentioned, but what you really should do is create a story of what the experience of somebody who's coming through your software application is going to, basically what they're going to see. And so I do recommend a 3-sentence overview statement. And so for the example that I have in this tutorial series, it's essentially a meetings app. And I have a why, how, what 3-sentence overview statement that I'll read here. It just says, we believe that meetings, at least those with the intent to get stuff done, should be more efficient. Too often meetings are disorganized and have agenda items that could be discussed over email and or don't really result in specific action items owned by specific people. Therefore, to solve this problem, we're going to build an app that coordinates users, meetings, agenda items, and action items. So that's a quick 3-sentence overview statement. I actually recommend all startups when they're getting off the ground should boil it down to 3 sentences like that roughly do a why, how, and a what per Simon Sinek's material on this whole start with why thing. But what I'm going to basically talk about here is your overview story is don't overthink it. Just say, hey, a new user visits the website. They easily understand it's an app to make meetings more efficient, or whatever your story is. She's going to be able, if we're talking about a female user that identifies as she with the she pronoun, she will be able to easily start sign up process by entering an email address. If desired, she can contact us, read testimonials about us, other marketing material to help her understand the app and trust it enough to start the sign up process. So that's essentially a new user. And existing user, after confirming email, she'll set a password, see the dashboard, she'll see a number of things. So you can see if you're watching the screencast here, I'm literally showing an example of this. I'll put the link in the show notes, of course, and you can read through this. But that's it. It's like she does this, she sees a meeting, she schedules it, she does this, XYZ, leading up to a meeting and during a meeting. She can comment on agenda items, or anybody on the thing can do that. And that overview statement is a really important part of the first step of when you're actually building your product. Again, if you go back to the overview that I have about how to actually build a tech startup, you may do some research and realize, what you think your overview story isn't quite right yet. But again, I'm sort of skipping the line here, going right to the overview story. And for sure, you should have friends, family, anyone you trust, ideally people in the customer profile, review that overview story with you to agree that, hey, this is something valuable that I would sign up for and use and hopefully pay money for. So that's the product side. And then I just want to finish this episode by walking through some code. If you're walking through this curriculum, if you go to the code section here, this Go Rail page here, I'll just pull it up. This Go Rail page, you can, as I walked through before on this podcast, you can choose your operating system, and then it will walk you through how to set up Homebrew and your terminal and Ruby and others. And this gets you all the way to the point where you have a web application on your local machine. So if you've downloaded and installed Visual Studio Code, I've just named this little app another test app because I have a whole bunch of test apps on my machine here. And what I want to do is just take a few minutes and just walk through what is this file structure here in any Ruby on Rails app, right? I mean, there's plenty of Rails tutorials and other videos you can watch, so I'm not going to reinvent that. But what I'm going to just tell you is this is how the structure of a Rails app works, where I have an app folder. This app folder has assets. It has channels. Channels are when we have the fancy HTML over the wire and we're sending bits of HTML to open web browsers from our different users that are connecting to our app. These are the channels that guide that code. We have controllers that receive basically tee up the information after they come through our routes, which I'll talk here in a minute. We have helpers that give us little libraries that we can inject into our code. We store all of our JavaScript in the JavaScript folder. We do background jobs, which we'll talk about extensively here, in the jobs folder. When we send emails to people, like transactional emails or other types, we can use mailers to do that. Models are what connect to our database. So if we have, for example, a user, say you have 100,000 users, those are all going to be records in your database, and that user model is what connects our app to the database, and then allows us to pull all that information to controllers, so that we then ultimately, finally, in our app, produce views. And that's where the HTML, CSS, JavaScript is constructed, so that it actually gets spit out to the app. And I'll walk through the rest of these files in a later episode. But what I basically just want to show you is that when you first spin up an application here, right? When you get to the end of that tutorial at GoRails and you have a running server on port 3000 and you go to localhost 3000, you originally get this Rails welcome screen. And this has changed over the years. I've been building Rails apps since 2005. And it's been kind of cool to see. And that was the original 0 point something version. So now we're on Rails 7.04 here as the time of this recording. And in order to actually start building your Rails app, once you get to that point, you can start by actually creating a welcome controller here. So I'm literally going to do that for those that are watching the screencast. I'm just going to call this welcome_controller.rb, and that has a blank file that just set up. I'm actually going to copy and paste from the application controller real quick, and just it's going to inherit from the application controller. That's what this inheritance means. So, and I'm just going to name it the welcome controller. Welcome controller, like that. We're going to have one method called index, and that's going to have we're just going to leave it blank. So this right here, we have a class called welcome controller that inherits from the application controller. It has one method called index. We then have to pop over to our views and create a folder called welcome. And then in welcome, create a file called index.html.erb. We can do a quick H1 here and say hello world. And then in our routes file, so over here in config, you go down to routes. We're going to we're going to uncomment this root and change it to the welcome controller index like so. And then when we hit refresh on our localhost 3000, you'll see the hello world. And if you view source on this, it will view source. Here we go. It will show you everything that it just pumped out. And that comes through the application layout, and then it reveals our little hello world here from that application. So you could go back and watch that. I'd encourage you, if you're at the point where you're just learning Rails, just repeat what I just did, and you can get a quick hello world up and running. And then you can jump into Michael Hartle's Rails tutorial or any Rails tutorial out there and dive into more specifics. But I'm gonna, week by week here, I'm gonna give you short little tutorials like this, so that we can be rocking and rolling. Again, jump into Banyan DAO. I'll put the links for the Discord, and feel free to ask any questions there. And yeah, again, if you're watching the screencast, you can also listen at any time. You could just open your podcast player and search for Ventures, and it should show up. All right, have a great rest of your week, y'all. I'll see you next time. Cheers. All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.